I just thought it was the worst call of the year. That's all.
We're not going to make promises, but I tell you this.
Yeah, I'm about to get wild. I know that. Let's get wild.
I'm not answer anybody's question but yours. But you're an idiot. And really disloyal.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Disloyal Idiots podcast here on the Fans First Sports Network. Christian Guzman here, alongside Andy Preckwer, no Steve Howler, with us this week. But hopefully we'll have him back next week when we expect much more news to come out of the Syracuse athletics program, just in general. Andy,
yeah,
we're in an interesting spot right now.
I mean, hell of a tease. The week that was already fairly interesting, and I know that we haven't been on for 2 weeks, but spoiler alert, the basketball team pretty much did the same thing in both weeks. Spoiler alert, the lacrosse teams pretty much did this exactly what was expected in those 2 weeks. And the women's team continued to do exactly what we expected them to do, which was be a top half, but not quite elite ACC team. None of that is what Christian and I are referencing right now. The off the field drama at Syracuse is not uncommon, but I will say that this is a new one for me because of the drama around what clearly is a PR war being waged in the public domain of Syracuse.com articles and scoopage for the next athletic director, and the very obvious fact that this athletic director's first order of business is going to be firing Red Autry and replacing him within the first 20 days of their tenure. So, you know, just a normal job that you're stepping into here.
Mm-hmm. I think what we should actually go to first is something that's not particularly athletics related, but still very much athletics related at the same time. Because we have to remember because yes, we all think the athletic director is like one of the most powerful people at Syracuse. But whoever the athletic director is at Syracuse still reports to someone.
Yes.
And that someone happens to be the chancellor. Which Syracuse got a new chancellor finally after Ken Severud had reported that he was going to step down, essentially retire before going to Michigan. But still, the timeline remained the same. Syracuse had been looking for a new chancellor since essentially end of August, beginning of September. I think that's when the announcement happened. And this week, Syracuse hired its new chancellor in Mike Haney. Now, that's important to note. Mike Haney has been in Syracuse, so this essentially was an in-house promotion for him because he had been in Syracuse and had been very, very involved, from what I can tell, in just general Syracuse day-to-day operations. I don't know how much to explain much more. I think Andy has a much more has many more ideas of what this hire means for Syracuse. But it's important to note that the first steps in place for Syracuse to get a new athletic director with John Wildhack retiring at the end of this year.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways that you can go with this, and I want to start with the very obvious one, which is this is an internal promotion to the most powerful position on campus. Now, when you look at how Syracuse has traditionally conducted itself, it rarely has gone for the internal promotion at these positions. If you remember, Ken Severud was external. He was from the Rochester area, but he had been working at, I believe, St. Louis area universities, specifically, I believe, the St. Louis Law School. If you look at the athletic directors. John Wildhack had been legitimately an industry outsider, was working at ESPN. Mark Coyle before that had been working at Boise State. Before that, Dr. Daryl Gross had been working outside of the Syracuse area in athletics. Nancy Cantor, another one, did not come from the Syracuse tree. So like, as long as I have been involved with Syracuse, which is now, over 15 years, they have predominantly gone with the outside hire. And this is the first time that they've really gone internal for such a high ranking position. And I think you can read that a variety of different ways, because remember, Kent Severud announced at the beginning of this school year that he was going to be stepping down. And then it was just a couple of months ago that it was announced, oh, by the way, he's not retiring. He's going to go take a job at the University of Michigan, who is looking for a chancellor, which definitively is a step up for Kent Severud. Now, what this means to me is that it is abundantly clear, much like with our athletic department as a whole, Syracuse University is not the top of the pile. And I think that when you talk to a lot of people at Syracuse, and when you talk about what their ambitions for Syracuse is, it is for the university to be at the top of the pile in everything. Obviously, that's very difficult to do, but that is the goal and that is the standard that the university prides itself on. And there is no way to slice it. Over the last 5 years, specifically since the pandemic, Syracuse has been on a downward trajectory. Whether you look at academic rankings, whether you look at school by school rankings, whether you look at fundraising, whether you look at endowment, all of it is tracking below the growth of what Syracuse would consider its peers or the next level up, or it's been just a straight decline from where Syracuse was previously. And so for me, you promote the interim when things are going well. When you say, hey, we have some momentum here and we would like to maintain this momentum, and we do not feel confident in any of these hires that we can potentially bring in to keep that momentum going. Obviously, there are different variations of interim, such as with Syracuse football, Scott Schaefer was very much the panic interim of, oh my gosh, we lost Doug Marrone in a cycle where we had no intention of actually going out and hiring a new coach. And now we need to maintain what was at the time the best run of football we had had since the Greg Robinson years, which obviously very low bar here, but you kind of understood where they were going with that. So when you are in a position where the university has been tracking negatively and you promote the interim, two things really kind of come to my mind as how this happened. The first is that the interim has really been in charge for the last year or two, and this was always the plan. Even though you do the motions of a national search or whatnot, the reality is that there is a world where Chancellor Haney, now Chancellor-elect, I think he's going with Chancellor-elect or Chancellor-to-be. I forget what
I think it's Chancellor-elect right now. That's what he's going with, yeah.
Yeah, so Chancellor-elect Haney, there's a world where he has actually been doing the duties of a chancellor for the last year or two, and this move is Syracuse Board of Trustees saying, we like the direction that things are moving behind the scenes. Now that you've been in charge, now we're officially giving you the title because we like the direction you're starting to push things in. Obviously, at that level, things move slowly. So especially if we're dealing with the last 12 months since Kent's announcement that he's stepping down, there might be a lot of things that Haney has been enacting behind the scenes that we just can't see and we won't know the benefits of until further down the road. So that's option one. That to me is the charitable read of this situation. The less charitable read of this situation is that Syracuse, as we saw with Fran Brown, as we saw with Adrian Autry, even though they made changes from who had previously been in charge, the funds allocated to those programs did not really change. Jim Boeheim very famously was making about $2 million a year, underpaid given his stature and what Mike Krzyzewski and what Roy Williams and what Bill Self and what quote unquote peers in the industry to Boeheim were making. But Jim Boeheim was very much I don't need more than $2 million a year in Syracuse, so why would I ask for more than $2 million a year in Syracuse? Red Autry, according to the USA Today coaches database, which uses obviously public available records, reported that Adrian Autry's salary for this year was $2.1 million. That is 60th nationally when it comes to coaching basketball salaries. And when you look at what Syracuse has gotten over the last 3 years with Autry, I think 60th would be a little bit generous, but that's about the neighborhood that Syracuse has been. When you look at Fran Brown on the football side, Dino Babers was reportedly making somewhere in the neighborhood of $3.5 to $4 million, depending on how you wanted to do the accounting. I can report that Fran Brown is making about $4 million. There's some higher allocation than in previous regimes for staff and for facilities and for the apparatus that is around football than what Dino Babers had. But on paper, the salary is about the same. And so when you, obviously that's athletics and not the entire university as a whole, but Syracuse seems to very much say we have this money allocated for our highest profile and highest paid positions. We are not going above that rate. And so when you look at the landscape of college in general right now, everything is changing. It's much more volatile. There's a lot more people who are trying to aggressively move up ladders and want to be compensated more for what is now a much more higher profile position publicly and comes with a lot more scrutiny and, for lack of a better word, dealing with people's shit than ever before. And sometimes that person is the president of the United States. And that was something Syracuse definitely found themselves in over the last 2 to 3 years. And so people, rightfully so, say the job description has changed. The compensation should change as well. And so I think the less charitable read of Syracuse hiring the interim is going out into the market and saying, we would like to pay this rate for this position, and the market responding with candidates who were not qualified or candidates that Syracuse wanted who did not want to interview or follow through because of the compensation package. And so Syracuse goes, we have an internal hire that we can promote, and we'll take the rate and do the job at that rate because he's been doing this job for the last year or so. And so, again, there's probably a little bit of both happening in this situation, but all of this is important context because, as Christian mentioned, this is not the only opening Syracuse has at the moment that is high visibility and high importance to the university as a whole.
And probably not the only one that's going to come within the next days or so.
Yeah, and so it becomes interesting because at the end of the day, the board of trustees is the one controlling these decisions. As much as we want to try to find the magical person who's in charge of this all, there is a committee of people who are very rich and have very powerful day jobs, or used to have very powerful day jobs, and are part of the board of trustees of Syracuse. And they as a collective are the ones that are making a lot of these decisions. And so that group collectively is going to be part of the group that hires the next athletic director of Syracuse, which according to which again, this is only in Syracuse, according to a random basketball report that had nothing to do with the athletic department news at all, but instead had to do with Red Autry's status, dropped that the university is expected to announce their new athletic director this week, which would fit the timeline based off of of John Wildhack's announcement that he was going to step down, and would fit the timeline of with Mike Haney's appointment that he would roll right into the athletic director search, especially considering that before this announcement was made of him becoming the new chancellor, he was already on the committee looking for the new athletic director. So, probably could have read that. We probably should have read some of the tea leaves there.
I don't think I think some people realize this. I don't think people realize how important the next two big hires for Syracuse is to just Syracuse and its future amongst the premier programs of college athletics. Syracuse desperately needs to get these next two hires right in order to, in my opinion, stay nationally relevant the way that we remember Syracuse being nationally relevant.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, it's based on what we've heard. It looks there's a lot of reasons to believe that the first of those big decisions might already be incredibly divisive.
Yeah. I am. I want to put this as delicately as I can because, again, there's a lot of speculation happening.
Exactly.
There's a lot of rumors that are happening.
Mm-hmm.
It is very clear, based off of the chancellor search that just took place, Syracuse does not want news of their appointments making the news. There was no leak about Haney taking the job. There was no leak about who was interviewing for these jobs. There were no stories with candidates who wanted the job. It was, this process is happening behind closed doors. These closed doors are being respected. And now these doors are going to be opened once we have our new guy. And in the case of the Syracuse athletic director search, that has not been how this process has unfolded, with at least one candidate leaking to Syracuse.com that he was interviewing, another doing an interview where she explicitly says, I want this job, and at least 2 to 4 other candidates visiting campus and the news of their visits being leaked without major details. Which is, for those who have not been around Syracuse athletics long enough, Christian and I have both been on the front lines of dealing with communication staff members from the university and asking questions like, hey, there is this report about X, Y, and Z. Can you please confirm or give a statement on X, Y, or Z? And their response is, you should not be talking about that. This is just so atypical of how the university wants to run its comms. The fact that this is happening leads one with common sense to believe things are a bit messy behind the scenes when it comes to who to hire for athletic director. And that is why all of the pretext I need to say before we talk about the Heather Lyke situation.
Yeah, I don't think, for those who don't know, we don't have to go into too much detail about that candidate in particular. I think it's very clear, based on, if you know our previous content, we stand on one particular side of whether or not she is the right candidate for the athletic director position. I think, just based on what Andy had said about the chancellor position, is kind of a microcosm also of where this athletic director search is going, where I think there might have been more exciting candidates that I think Andy, myself, and no doubt our colleagues at News Magician would have liked to see more pushed out in terms of rumored candidates. But it seems like the most serious options that are available are maybe just, quote unquote, the safe options based on the constraints of the current job, and also potentially the current financial ability of said job, which I don't think is it's a topic, and it's an area of the search that hasn't just come up a lot in terms of, the online discussion about who should be Syracuse's next athletic director. Because, as Andy said, it seems like it's been, I wouldn't say easier, but again, more common that Syracuse has gone outside of normal Syracuse or normal athletics minded people to look for hires in this type of position. And it's maybe in recent memory have we seen Syracuse stick closer to home in terms of people who are familiar with the program, et cetera, et cetera. I think, obviously, I think for both of us, if Syracuse wants to take that next step and be one of those nationally relevant programs, when inevitably college athletics does become what we think it's going to be, Super League style, it feels like Syracuse should have been maybe a bit more aggressive in pursuing someone unique and willing to take the shots with maybe and be creative with the resources that they could be, instead of someone who maybe would have been safer and would have just maybe have stuck to the status quo, which is what it feels like a lot of this recent trend has been for Syracuse.
Yes, and I think that you kind of hit the nail on the head here, where there is just so much change coming to sports, and specifically with football, that you and I have talked at length about on the show previously, where if you are not going to be in the in crowd of football, not only does it change your perception of your athletic department, but it fundamentally changes the finances of your athletic department and what you can and cannot do. And so Syracuse is in a position where if it does not have football at the highest level that college offers football, you have many donors who have donated millions of dollars for football facilities that will no longer be used to facilitate top level football, and that's going to be an issue for those donors. You're going to have an athletic department budget that is based on getting $20+ million a year from a conference that will no longer come in, because that will be upended. And that trickle down effect will impact every sport. That will impact the Olympic sports. That will impact basketball. That will impact so many things. And having an athletic department head who is not willing to be aggressive and not willing to try things that are outside of the box and not willing to be a leader in NIL fundraising and NIL management is just no longer an option for a school like Syracuse. And so when you look at a person like Heather going to Syracuse.com and saying, hey, I really want this job, but your credentials are at a University of Pittsburgh that has the exact same issues and the exact same complaints that Syracuse has, while under her watch, none of those things were handled in a way that the university felt were satisfactory. And you look at who else Syracuse might be bringing in internally, like Herm is stepping away, and a lot of these other longer tenured athletic members are stepping away because of things changing. It's clear you've got to go young and you've got to go outside the box. And so I think for Syracuse, without going into the myriad of people that may or may not actually be interviewing for this job, the reality is that they might go outside the box with somebody who's never been in collegiate athletics before. And that is a hell of a risk. And the sad thing is that we already ran that playbook with Wild Hack. And I don't think Syracuse is meaningfully different than where it was when Wild Hack started, if only because while Syracuse has made some advancements and was able to get the dome renovations over the line, pretty much all of our peer institutions did the same thing, and you did all these things, and then you look around and it's like, we didn't really move at all. Everybody just moved at the same time. Syracuse has to move faster, and Syracuse has to move more than everybody else. And so you want somebody that can do that. And again, the Heather is the only candidate that has put her name out in the press and said, I want this job. I am going to try to take this job. she is not the kind of candidate that screams any of those things and would, in my opinion, signal that Syracuse is not serious about the threats that are coming to college sports moving forward. And to me, personally, I think that is a tremendous mistake to make at the university level.
Like, I think a lot of people who know the name Heather like know about maybe off field concerns about her. We don't need to go into those. What we should go into is the on field concerns. And again, yes, Pitt football has had relative success here and there, but I wouldn't call Pitt football a nationally relevant program. We have seen what's gone horrifically wrong with both of their basketball programs. Their women's basketball coach has already been fired, and reports have been come out that it was increasingly tough to fire said women's basketball head coach because of the contract that was signed by Heather Like. And Pitt donors are reportedly raising a lot of money just to buy out Jeff Capel for out of his men's basketball contract to get him fired this season as well. And so the on-field athletic success for Pitt, at least in terms of the major sports, they've had some success in other Olympic sports, but in terms of the major revenue sports, is basically on par with what Syracuse has been. And you can't, as Andy said, you can't afford to be on par. Now, what I will give credit to John Wildhack for is he did what he did very well. Again, he came from ESPN, and he used that experience to build up Syracuse's media and their internal media department. And because of that, Syracuse has the facilities to air most of its sports, both revenue and non-revenue, out of Syracuse and put on a quality production on TV. And as we've seen as of recently, clicks and views are driving revenue share. And I think that's at that time when Wildhack was hired, that was slowly becoming more and more of a thing where TV revenues were starting to explode exponentially. And that maybe was the right hire at the time because of that. But now we're in the era where the on field results drastically impact how your program is viewed nationally. And that's going to determine where your revenue is going to come from, especially if you're going to be invited to the big dances that you need to in order to enjoy the money that is going into college athletics, which means you need someone in this day and age of college athletics to be a person who can handle making the right decisions for the on the field product, not just for the coaches, but for the athletes as well. So you need someone ideally who maybe not necessarily hires the right head coach, although you would like that, but more importantly, as Andy pointed out, someone who is savvy enough with the current landscape of NIL to distribute and allocate those funds in a correct way to the benefit of your program. And I think that's where a lot of our frustration, at least amongst our colleagues like News Tradition, comes, is that the candidates that have been rumored don't necessarily have the NIL experience that is needed in order to be competitive in this day and age of college athletics. What have so many people said about this Syracuse basketball program other than the obvious discourse about Adrian Autry? It's that Syracuse doesn't have the money to play with the other teams in the conference. So what you ideally should be looking at is, especially if you're trying to get Syracuse back to the nationally relevant program that so many want it to be in basketball, and in the same way with football, is that you need someone who can be smart and knowledgeable and creative with the NIL funds that Syracuse has, which means you need someone with experience in that area as well. And like I said, the candidates that have been rumored to have been interviewed or have been interested in the Syracuse job don't necessarily seem like they have that type of experience in order to bring Syracuse back to the competitive level it needs to be in order to position itself for what is inevitably going to be the biggest change in college athletics coming soon.
Yeah. And the final thing I'll just kind of add to this whole conversation is that it's going to be very difficult to find someone who has the perfect amount of experience that you're looking for. It's going to be very difficult to find somebody who is exactly what you're looking for here. That being said, I do think that there is a world where there are multiple young deputy ADs out there who fit this mold and have been working on the ground with these types of problems at major Power 4 universities. And those are the types of people that the Syracuse search committee should be looking at, and maybe they have, and maybe they just have not had any luck being able to convince one of those people to take the job, or maybe they will. Again, we don't know, but we're expecting to hear news about that this week. At the end of the day, college sports today is different than it was yesterday, and was different than it was a year before, and was different than it was 3 years ago, and 5 years ago, and 10 years ago, at a rate of exponential change that is very unique to very few industries. And so bringing in somebody who is used to playing by the old rules is not what you want to do. I think that the obvious parallel here is that college sports is going through what I think we saw happen in the media world probably about a decade to 15, 20 years ago, where you had this model where it was a newspaper or a magazine or something physical, and people paid a lot of money to advertise, and you could build all of your content off of your advertising and subscription models, and everything was fine. And then the internet showed up and changed everything. And the companies that did not adapt to this new world very slowly ended up dying out, to the point that now we've seen there are a few hangers on, but pretty much everybody who's still around today has completely pivoted away from the old playbook and into some sort of new playbook that is still being developed on the fly. Same thing is happening in college sports. And the last thing you want to do is bring in somebody who has not righted the ship back when the rules were what they were, let alone with the rules changing now. And the reason that we say all this is because at the end of the day, Christian and I and Steve, we obviously love Syracuse football, and we want Syracuse football to be playing at the highest level. But if football isn't what it is, there's no guarantee that basketball can continue to operate at a high level. There's no guarantee that lacrosse can continue to execute at a high level. Just given the amount of money that comes into the university via football from these external sources, I think that there's an argument to be said, sure, we might be able to keep basketball, but then all of a sudden you're looking at a lot of women's Olympic sports getting cut, because the argument is, well, we just don't have the money for that anymore without football to bring in the massive millions of dollars and conference affiliations that are necessary to support other sports. And so look, football makes the whole thing go round, and that's why it matters the most. That being said, Syracuse is interesting because while football is going to be super important and should be the direction, the basketball program is kind of the thing that keeps fans engaged with the university the longest. And as we have seen this year, when the basketball team is bad, man, people will check out of Syracuse faster than ever before. And that's also something you don't want to deal with. So yeah, I like, that's kind of my segue here into saying that, like, man, the way that the Syracuse basketball regular season ended this week, a little too on the nose for my liking, to be completely honest.
Yeah, it feels like it's just going along with what the theme of this podcast has been. It's just been bad decision after bad decision that, eventually culminates into the product that you see on the court. And it feels like both player and coach that on Saturday, again, decisions just weren't exactly, I think, the right ones from both sides. I mean, even though he's calmed down a bit with it, Autry's rotations and player personnel management still hasn't been great. And then when it comes to clutch time situations, it feels like, there's a lot of panic going on with Syracuse when it comes to, making the decisions they need to in those big final moments in order to close out games or come away with victories in games.
Yeah. I think one of the things about this basketball team that really kind of annoyed me is that when you look at what Red Autry says after the games, it's about the team not being tough enough. It's about the team's decision making. It's about the team just not playing smart basketball. And then you realize the inconsistencies that just exist on every single player level. Like, I had a friend text me, and I won't out him on this one, but he texted me and he said JJ scoring 0 points in an overtime game against the worst team in the conference as his last game is a little too on the nose, right? And like, not to call out one player for what was a collective loss there, but the story of JJ's time at Syracuse fits neatly with the narrative of Autry's story, which is you never knew what you were getting on a night-to-night basis, and there was never any belief that linear development was going to be something that we could expect.
It would have been interesting to see how that would have all worked out if JJ doesn't, have major shoulder surgery. Try saying that 3 times fast, and
Yeah,
how that doesn't affect his game as much, because I mean, JJ is very much a contact, drive to the hoop player. You could see it just in general as well how much that affected his shot, you know, throughout his year and throughout his Syracuse career. No place no more evident than the free throw line. But at the same time, you as a player have to, you're still expected to perform on the floor, and you would at least think your coaching staff could help you in terms of fixing, or at least like getting back to a consistent version of what you were before an injury. And it's Syracuse in general continues to be marked by inconsistency, because do you believe this is the same team that took Houston to overtime and beat Tennessee and nearly beat Kansas earlier this year? It just doesn't look like it at all. And that's a damning sign, because this should have been a team, especially what we saw from the I shouldn't say preseason, but from the non-conference play, albeit before the Hofstra game, but in the non-conference game, including the Tennessee game, it's a Syracuse team that looked to be trending in the right direction. You had a lot of talent. You stayed close within teams. It felt like the only area where you had really big concerns was free throw shooting, and obviously a lot of people know that can be fixed. You look at how Syracuse performed down the stretch. Syracuse was a fairly good free throw shooting team once you got to conference play. And what has happened since that Hofstra loss has I think really decimated a lot of this program, just because you were off to such a great start to the year. Because you feel like, you're bummed out by how Vegas went, but there was a lot to build off in Vegas.
Yeah. Which, literally speaking, Vegas feels like a year ago, which it was in the most literal definition of the word. But
I mean, technically, yes.
In the literal definition, it was in fact a year ago. But also, even the Tennessee game feels like eons ago, not just in terms of how long ago that game was and how trying the season has been, but just in terms of how differently we were looking at and approaching this team. Like the disappearance of Cayenne Anthony, the aggressiveness and just general flexibility that the lineup was potentially offering. all those things just completely evaporated once ACC play started. And the warning signs were obviously there. You can go back and listen to old episodes of this podcast, and we clearly talk about them. But again, I think when you look at this and you go, how much of this is the players and how much of this is red? The answer is it's both. But the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And this is the third straight year that this is the same narrative that we've had about this team, about the way that they play under red, about the way that the team collapses when we get to conference play. Like, this is the first time that I can remember going into conference play, or the conference tournament play rather, and just being like, I hope they lose. Like, I hope SMU smokes them. Like, we need to just be done with this era. We need to be done with this season, and we need to move on. And the only way that happens is for Syracuse to officially be eliminated. And I think that when you have swatches of the fan base that are more than just like a couple of people saying, I want the team's season to be over so we can move on and close the book on this chapter, that is bad and something that needs to be rectified immediately. The good news is, at least, nationally speaking, Georgia Tech is the first Power 5 program to fire their coach. It appears that if Syracuse were to fire Autry and move on, most professional beat writers at the national level seem to say Syracuse will clearly be the crown jewel job of this cycle, and probably the crown jewel of the next couple of cycles, just based off of, where the elite programs are in terms of their head coaching stability, and what Syracuse, even though we did mention at the top, like, Red is getting paid the 60th highest, head coaching salary, in terms of the facilities, in terms of the alumni support, in terms of what the program is. This Syracuse going into this offseason should not have to worry about coaches not being interested in Syracuse.
It's interesting as well how this national discussion has gone as well. And I will take this with a grain of salt as well, because Andy and I aren't as tuned into how coaches and programs have necessarily performed and how they play as we are to like football. Because there is a fear that if, and most likely when, the Syracuse jobs opens, the biggest name that's been out there, that's been rumored, could be considered a safe hire as well. But I think, maybe ironically or not ironically in this case, it's not as quote unquote a safe hire because of what he's done with building up smaller programs with lesser revenue to win conference championships and get success. Of course, we're talking about Brian Hodgson out of South Florida. And from what's been reported, he wants this job as well. So he's a Buffalo native, Western New York, so you know that he'll at least have that as well. That would be enticing to how Syracuse has hired recently, as Andy and I have alluded to earlier, in terms of quote unquote safer hires. You have someone who is relatively local to the area and would obviously know about Syracuse and, the pedigree that comes with Syracuse. Could you make the argument that Syracuse should try and go for someone else outside the box? Absolutely. The problem is once again, is that person available? We've already seen it heard reported that Josh Scherers out of St. Louis has turned down an interview with Kansas State. So, like, he that's probably the biggest name that's reportedly going to be available in the head coaching cycle. is there someone else better than Josh Harris and Brian Hodgson? Probably not, at least from what I can tell. So, but I think what casual fans might be concerned about with Hodgson, especially since Syracuse has been used to hiring in the family, and because it's been behind for nearly 50 years, I think concerns over a local hire can be dissuaded with Hodgson's resume, which is, I think a lot can be said more about Hodgson than maybe, the other hires that we've talked about for chancellor and athletic director, where, yes, the local hire in this case has the resume to back up the reason why he should be the favorite, which is, I think, why a lot of people online want him to be the hire for the job.
Yeah, I think when you look at the landscape at large, a lot of the criticisms around guys that you would bring in are around the age. So, for example, like Casey Alexander at Belmont. Belmont has been a consistent mid-major power and a March Cinderella for the last few years. It looks like Kansas State is narrowing on him because he's 53 years old. And when you are looking at a place, same thing like Randy Bennett at St. Mary's. Bennett is 63. Those are the guys that have, tournament experience, but at that age, how long would they really be leading the Syracuse program? And I think the reality is, like we talked about with the athletic director search, Syracuse does not want this job to be a stepping stone job. Syracuse wants this to be the primary destination job. They want the young coach who's going to come in and maybe not necessarily be the next Boeheim, because I don't think that that's possible anymore. But I think that they like something like what Hurley has done at UConn, where it is abundantly clear that after this last NBA coaching cycle, Hurley's never leaving UConn until he wants to leave UConn. And he's probably not going to be at UConn as long as Calhoun was or as long as Boeheim was at Syracuse. But he's going to be the coach of UConn until he isn't. And the reality is that in this day and age, a guy like Hurley is probably your prototypical hire where the job is a grind. It's going to grind you into dust. You're probably going to retire earlier than your predecessors did, but you can be a one coach guy or one school guy if you get in at the right time. And I think that's where you keep seeing the Schurz and the Hodgson names come up, is because they fit that like right age profile while still having some experience in the big chair. Like Hodgson is 38 years old and already has 3 tremendous winning seasons under his belt. Schurz is another one who I believe is in his late 30s, early 40s. And it fits that profile. And so I think that when you're looking at, what type of coach Syracuse could look at as these names start to pop up, there are plenty of really high-ranking assistants. This isn't Syracuse football. They are not going to go after a high-ranking assistant as a first-time head coach because they just did that and it didn't work. You're going to go now and find someone who's been in the head chair before somewhere else, has the youth and has the energy necessary to potentially be in this job for 20 years and be a rock of stability for a program that Syracuse really just wants to win 20 to 25 games every year, make the tournament, be consistently one of the top 16 teams in the country, 3 out of every 5 years. Like, that's what Syracuse wants out of basketball. That's what the fans want out of basketball. And they want to be able to, they want to have to solve problems around football, not solve problems around basketball. So I think that that's the kind of profile of guys that we're going to hear about when Syracuse comes open. The only thing that again, not to keep harping on the money of it all, but at the end of the day, this is going to come down to money. What is the salary? What is the salary pool for assistants? Is Alex Klein the general manager or not? And if he's not, does that mean that they have their own guy ready to come in and be the GM? And finally, what is the NIL pool that Syracuse has to play with? From what we've heard so far, the pool has been fairly large. It's just been going to players who aren't producing for the amount of money that they're being paid. But if that's the situation that Syracuse is playing in, it'll be a highly desirable job for coaches. The one thing that I would caution on, I'm meeting up with some more basketball people this week. The Big East tournament's taking place, and so there's going to be some college basketball people around New York that are much smarter than me at this stuff, and I will go and ask them as many questions as I possibly can. It doesn't appear right now as if the idea of poaching another power forward coach is really in the cards. That I don't know if that's like a Syracuse specific thing or if that's an industry specific thing, but it does not appear as if any of the schools that might open are looking at other power four coaches and trying to poach them the way that we saw with football. And again, that's something that like I've been asked about in this coaching search. I like Christian said off the top, like this isn't our area of expertise. So I can't say for certain definitely that that's not going to happen, but it seems like that seems to be the general vibe. That if you are already a sitting power four head coach, you are not looking to move to another power four job that isn't Duke, UNC, or Kentucky.
I mean, those jobs aren't opening up in the first place.
Right, exactly. And so I just wonder then if we're just like in a weird era with basketball where, look, once you get into the power four, you're in the power four and you just kind of hang out there until you're fired or you retire.
Yeah, at least in basketball, if you're a head coach, I think that's the case. The poaching from the power four that I think you're going to see is coming from assistants. Like who's the front runner for ACC Coach of the Year this year? It's Jay Lucas. What was he last year? Duke assistant, and he's done pretty well with Miami this year, completing a pretty impressive turnaround. So, and the other thing is that's like out of what you think might be mediocre or struggling power four programs. One, do you think that coach is available? Two, and is that coach really the kind of coach you want to be like trying to poach? Because if you're Syracuse, if you're looking to try and even get and consider a power four head coach, you want that head coach to at least make the NCAA tournament.
Mm-hmm.
And of options available, there's probably not many of them who are going to want to leave their current situations if they make the NCAA tournament just in general. So your options become very, very limited in that regard.
Yeah, I think that that's a great read, and I'm intrigued to see what happens here. Really intrigued to see what happens here, just in terms of which names get leaked. And if you don't already, I would highly suggest figuring out a way to get on to Donna or Mike Waters' newsletters that they do. Feel like we're going to start getting some interesting news nuggets coming fairly soon. So the fun part is that Christian and I have been talking for almost an hour, and we've barely talked about any actual on the field sports because, as we mentioned, it was bad. Christian, is there anything that we're missing from this week in terms of actual on the field action that's worth calling out in our final, few minutes of the Disloyal Idiots?
Absolutely, and we'll stick it with the dome sports. That's because that's what most people are interested in. Syracuse made it past the first round in terms of women's basketball. Made it past the first round of the ACC women's basketball tournament. They beat Cal 70-59 and then lost to Louisville in blowout fashion, unfortunately. Syracuse didn't have Dominique Darius available for that game. She landed awkwardly after a collision in the Cal game and was ruled out for the rest of the ACC tournament. No status yet on whether she'll be available for the NCAA tournament, which is most likely going to send Syracuse somewhere in the 8 and 9 seed range. And given, if you haven't seen recent NCAA memos concerning travel issues, would most likely send Syracuse to stores for the UConn region. It almost seems like a lock that Syracuse is going to be an 8-9 in UConn's number 1 area of the bracket. So you can expect that to most likely come during selection Sunday. Or is it Monday? I forget when they announced the women's basketball tournament nowadays. If
It's now. I think it's Selection Monday.
okay. So we'll wait for that to come for the women. It looks like they will be in the ACC. It looks like they will be in the NCAA tournament, and it looks like they will be comfortably an 8 or 9 seed. So, congrats to the ladies. Much deserved to get back into the NCAA tournament.
They needed that this year. You needed
Yes.
to show proof of concept that you could improve after what had transpired previously. But I'm really happy that there was improvement this year. The big question now moving forward is like, how do you build on it? How you retain players in the portal? All the fun questions that no one likes now in this new era of college sports.
Yeah, and congratulations to Jay Zoje. She won ACC Rookie of the Year and was named to the ACC first team in postseason honors. So congrats to her. What happened to the last Syracuse rookie that happened to?
Oh, they ended up at South Carolina, didn't they?
Yeah, and then ended up a top 5 WNBA pick with multiple championships. So hopefully Syracuse can hold on to his OJ. And hopefully Don Staley has not been watching a lot of games.
You know what? Unfortunately, I feel like Don Staley might have, but we're gonna keep our fingers crossed.
For those who don't know, we're referring to Camilo Cardoso, who started out at Syracuse, won Rookie of the Year, and then promptly went to South Carolina to win a couple national championships.
Yeah, that one hurt a little bit, but yeah, it is. Again, this is the world that you're in, and you're hoping that the women can get some level of support here in order to maintain and hold on to players that are really, really good, especially after such a strong year by the women in general.
Let's head over to lacrosse. The Syracuse men's lacrosse team got a much needed win after losing to both Harvard and Princeton. They pick up a overtime win against Penn. That was scary. And then importantly, they pick up a important road win against Johns Hopkins at Homewood. That was 10 versus 11 with Syracuse first being ranked 10. So a much needed victory for Syracuse to at least ease the jitters and the nerves around the program, especially after those losses against Harvard and Princeton, especially the Princeton loss where Syracuse did not look that great offensively. Even though Princeton's defense is pretty good. So the men and Gary Gate have their Colorado road trip next up. They play Air Force on Thursday and then round it out with a Monday contest at Denver over their next 2 games. And finally, yeah, go ahead.
I guess my question about the men's lacrosse team is just they seem pretty good. They seem potentially very, very good. Are they as good as their record and rankings seem to indicate?
We will see. I think a lot of it kind of comes down again to the offense because the offense is the star of this team. Can you take care of the ball in a way that allows you to win games? Is the important part for this men's team, I think, in particular. They did a really good job against that. They did a really good job of taking care of the ball against Maryland, which is one of the reasons why they won that game against Maryland. The other thing is that in those losses, John Mullen has been kind of bad by his standards and finally got back up to over 50% on against Johns Hopkins. So, yeah, you get John Mullen going, you probably have a good chance if you're Syracuse because obviously you want that potent offense to touch the ball as much as they can.
Yeah.
And finally, to wrap it up on the women's side, they started 0-3 on the season, but that's because they faced 3 top 10 teams to start the year in number 7 Maryland, number 1 North Carolina, and number 2 Stanford. So North Carolina and Stanford, I believe, are both still undefeated as well. So, not great. But Syracuse does come back and wins their next 4 games, needed wins over Loyola, Louisville, and Cal. And, starting to get their mojo back a little bit. This team is great on defense. Offensively, still trying to find their mojo. It's kind of interesting how it's flipped because this is a Syracuse defense, at least on the women's side, that is incredibly good. incredibly aggressive and really good at sniffing out inside passes into the 8-meter arc and just being very, very aggressive there. So it's all about for Syracuse is that can their offense keep up? Because the Syracuse offense, especially in the losses, has been very, very slow, and it has struggled to try and find the right passes to get good shots on Cage. So if Syracuse can get into a mojo offensively against the big hitters, that will be good. Guess what, Syracuse? You don't get to rest. You're traveling to Northwestern.
Oh, that team.
Yeah. Now, Northwestern has lost this year. Yes, it was to Colorado, which Andy is figuring out has a women's lacrosse program for the first time on this show.
You know what? Good for them. Good for them. Did not expect that, but good for them.
Yeah. Our good Syracuse friend Jay Alter, who obviously the number one play-by-play guy for women's lacrosse on ESPN, explained it as if because Northwestern previously before that Colorado win beat Boston College, who by the way I believe started also horrifically in women's lacrosse. That's a story that we'll have to watch as the season goes on, because Northwestern opens up the season beating Boston College, loses to Colorado. He explained it like if Alabama beat Georgia on like the opening weekend and then immediately lost to a Sun Belt team.
Yeah.
So like that's the kind of upset that fell Northwestern against Colorado, but they've responded with, good wins. Also barely surviving against Stony Brook and a certain older Spalina at the head of that program. So
yes.
we'll see how the Wildcats and Syracuse play on Thursday, which is the next game for Reggie Thorpe and the ladies.
Going to be a fun ride for the lacrosse teams for sure. Which is, hey, look, we'll take whatever positive we can get. At least we hope it's positive.
And I mentioned that historic bad start for Boston College women's lacrosse. They also started 0-3 on the year, and they're 3-4 right now on the season.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah,
very interesting.
All four of their losses are to ranked opponents, but at the same time, you saw how good this Boston College team was last year, so that's interesting to see. Like right now, it's UNC and Stanford that are on top of the women's lacrosse pegging. And I'll probably stay that way in the ACC, but at least, especially in both lacrosse worlds, there's been a lot of parity and a lot of, teams that are not necessarily finding their footing early on this year.
Definitely, lacrosse is going to continue to be interesting as it expands into programs. How that works for sure. Well, Christian, we've gone an hour. We had a lot to catch up on. I'm glad we did, even if some of it was not necessarily as fun. And we thank everybody here for staying with us and listening. If you like this podcast, make sure you like and subscribe. It helps us trick the AI into expanding the Ottoman Empire. We want to thank our friends at Fans First Sports Network for, of course, hosting us and continuing to help us grow the show every single week. Thank you to our friends at newsmagician.com, who are going to continue to be a proud supporter of the site, and we'll continue to, we'll post over there, they'll post over here, all the fun things. And thank you to everybody who's watching us on YouTube. We are, trying to grow everywhere we can. We appreciate being able to, if you like to watch us, like to watch the podcast, that means a lot to us as well. So for Christian, for myself, for Steve, as he continues to be recovering somewhere, we wish you the best. We hope that this week is filled with interesting news and not just sad news, but I think we're in for a treat this week. Definitely interested to see how it all breaks down. But as always, go Orange.
Go Orange.